Okay, what we're going to be doing now is we're going to be showing how to uh, basically put in our bones so that they could be attached to our meshes that we have over here. This is what's called the skinning process. So what we're just going to do here is just want to basically show you two different situations you might be in when going into the skinning process. One situation is if you have an area that doesn't really need to bend and basically it's just one object, then you could go for a single joint skin. And the other one is if you have multiple elements together and there does have to be areas that bend, and this would be basically a multi-element that could be like, again, your body, your arms, your legs, your fingers, and so on. It would be that kind of skin. So let's take a look at the first one. And this is, again, if you just have one little joint that has to go to one mesh like this. So what you would do is you'd select the actual joint, then the mesh, and in the rigging section, again, you just go to the upper left, go to rigging, and going into skin, and over here, you'll see an option called bind skin. Now, I gotta be honest, you're gonna see a lot of elements in here, but I'm gonna try and focus in only the areas that are gonna pertain to what we're doing at this time. But in here, we're gonna go to skin, bind skin, and each time you have to go to the settings box. There's no Insta button in this case, unfortunately. And what I would say in this case is, again, I'm just going to reset my settings so we're all on the same page, is when you're doing like one joint, I would probably reset by going to Edit, Reset Settings, and change this to Joint Hierarchy. Once that's done, you should be able to, again, change anything that you basically be able to put the joint and the mesh together. So again, the joint, then the actual the joint or joints in the actual mesh. And the reason why we're going selected joints is more times than not, you basically are going to want your joints to be, in a sense, very specific. So in this case, if I go with the selected joint here, I only will put on the joints that are necessary. But at least in terms of just one element like what we have over here, that's all we should need to do. And then when we hit apply, it should basically take into place. So now, when I move this joint, what you see here for this joint basically happens over here. And again, the purpose of this is to basically just put the actual 3D mesh onto the singular object. So the default settings, minus the bind to selected joint, is what you're going to want to choose. So just want to make sure that that's very clear. It's not too difficult when it's just one element, but if you have a whole body, it can be a problem. So anyways, so let's take a look at something a little bit more complex. So this is where things are going to get really complicated, and I want to make sure I go over most situations you might run into. So let's take a look. Now, before doing this, although we already did this in the previous lesson, you will want to delete your history, because again, this is going to have a more complex shape. And the way that we do this, if we have like multiple joints in one mesh, this is what you do. You first select the lowest in the hierarchy. That basically would be this part over here. And you can tell that this is the lowest because if I select this, nothing else gets selected. And also the arrows are facing upwards, as you can see. If I select the bottom, you'll see that all of it gets selected. And in this case, we need to be a little bit more precise. So selecting the first joint, hold Shift, then the second joint over here, third, then fourth. Now this would be a situation you could select if you were working with fingers and such. So I'm going to basically select the mesh once that's all done. I'm going to go to skin, bind skin, but you have to go to settings box. Now this is important. I've found that the best settings for skinning, because there's actually a lot of options for this, choose the geodesic voxel. That has a little bit of a better computing element that basically gets the skinning a little bit more accurate. Where it says the normalized method, try to go with an option called dual quaternion. That basically, again, calculates elements in a relatively neat way. These two elements, normalized weights and weight distribution, these can stay as they are. Don't change the multiple bind pose, especially for what we're doing. We don't want that to change. And for the max influences, I would recommend putting this to 2 to 3. 2, if you're in a little situation like what we're in over here. 3, if you know that certain vertices need to be selected to certain areas. We'll discuss this once we get to that point. And for the fallout, point 2 should actually do the job in most cases. So once that's all done, you hit apply. And that's pretty much the long and short of it. Now, the way that you could tell if the actual geometry is working well is, well, basically just move your joints around and see how they work. Now, I'm basically just doing this little by little like so. Just testing that that one works. That seems fine. Then I'm going to the next one, and this mostly seems okay. There's some shenanigans going on over here at the bottom part of there, so we definitely need to fix that. Okay, I'm going up here. There we are. There's some shenanigans going up over there, so we definitely need to fix that. And I'm going to show you how to fix that actually right now. So, but overall, it's not moving too badly, but I think we could do better. So this is how you can basically do better. When we're in this point, we can actually adjust how influences are done. So basically, to give you an idea of how this is working, each of these vertices have a certain amount of what's called influence to each of these joints. So if I move this over, that's why basically everything moves like so. But if I select this, basically the way that this is moving is anything that's connected or skinned to that particular part, that's why that's moving. Unfortunately, there's some bottom parts over here that are connected for some reason. Now, again, Maya does a pretty good job with the skinning, but it's not perfect. Usually you're going to have to do some changes. So this is how that would work. You would go to the skin, and you go to the paint weights, and you go to the settings box. Now we're going to focus our efforts on the 3 joints, this one, this one, and this one. This one we're going to add later, even though we're not really going to do anything with that. But yeah, basically, oh, you'll want to select your mesh when you do this, by the way. Double click here. But again, if you need to see where this was located, it's skin, paint skin weights, hit the settings box over here, and this will get you started. Now, this is actually looking a little bit different than what I have. Most likely when you first do this for the first time, you're going to see everything black and white like this, and probably your tools are going to look like this. I would strongly recommend getting in the view that I had previously by hitting the drop down over here and use an option called Use Color Ramp. Now the reason why we're doing this instead of the black and white is it will make these elements so much easier to see and so much easier to fix. Because again, black, whites, and grays, not that easy to identify. However, blue, green, yellow, orange, and red, a lot more easy to identify. We also have options for white and black, but I wouldn't recommend working with those too much. So this is basically how the whole thing is set up, and you can kind of see it here in the little hierarchy, the little colors that we have over here. Basically, the red has the most amount of influence, or basically will move the most parts. So again, if you see an area that's red, more likely than not, this area is going to affect, or sorry, this joint is going to affect whatever area is red. Meanwhile, anything that's blue, like again, anything that's up here, is going to have little to no influence. So if I was to select this one over here, you'll notice that when I move this up side to side, that's why all these elements move like so. But since this has little influence, with the exception of that little area over here, that's why it's basically moving the way that it is. So if I was to, once again, take a look at this, and this is one of the reasons why naming your joints so important, if you can. But yeah, my joint 2, that's basically this one over here, that has influence in this section, and of course, anything that goes beyond here moves as well. Joint 3, that's this one over here, and this is basically how it works. Now when it comes to adjusting and changing elements, you're going to do that by using the replace option. And what you could do with the replace, and by the way, just a bit of a heads up in the areas that are going to be the most important for us, it's going to be replace, add, and smooth, value, and of course using the color ramp and the stroke, which basically affects how big your brush is. Anything else, we really don't need to worry about as much yet, mostly because we're going to be keeping things very simple in terms of our bone rigs and skins, so we really don't need to get too complicated in all this other stuff. Oh, one other thing, if you hold down the B key, B as in boy, you can shrink down your brush, making a couple elements way easier. But we'll get into that. But in terms of how we basically replace elements, this is the main deal. The value, again, is what we will put in. Now, in terms of what we had right now, you saw some shenanigans going on when that area was moving. I'm actually going to go back to that influence so we can take a look. Yeah, this joint over here has no business moving elements over here. So we need to get rid of that. Simplest way would either be go to the joint itself and put the biggest value we have here. So let's actually take a look at the values before we go any further. Okay, now I put this on Blackboard, but you can take a quick screenshot if you want. But basically this is how it works. The least amount of value you can have is 0.0001. So that's basically has the least amount of influence. And each of these other values, like 0.1, 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, 0.9, these are all percentages. So 0.1 would be 10%, 0.25, which would be blue-greenish, that would be 25%, 0.5 would be yellow, which would be 50%. So this would be the area that we want to bend this at. This area over here, which is 0.75, this is reddish-orange. 0.9, it gets a little bit of a lighter red, and 0.99999 is crimson red. This is the most influence recommended. Now, I don't recommend ever putting a 0 or putting a 1. The reason why you don't want to do that is the way skinning works is it's kind of a teeter-totter effect. So you always need to have influence of some kind in some area. If you don't, Maya will basically put influence where it wants to. It's a little confusing at first, but when you see it in action, it makes a little bit more sense. So let's actually play around with this. So in short, I could, to basically keep this in place, for joint 1, that's basically the joint I have over here, I put a value of 0.9999, and I could just basically paint that in. And you'll see that the color changes immediately. And again, this should not change. There we are. Unless we tell it to. Now the other way that you can approach this is if you go to the very top. So you can see that basically, for some reason, this joint has some influence over here. If I change the value, which is over here, to 0.0001, I can basically get rid of influence. But again, you have to basically do it the way that I'm showing. But check this out. Once I'm done with actually getting rid of the influence, next time I go to joint 3, you'll see that it no longer is waning in its influence anymore. This is what I'm talking about with the teeter-totter effect. If you change an area a little bit here, so let's say for whatever reason, I put this at a point value of 2.5, and I just color this in a little bit. Next time I go to joint 3, you'll see that it changes here. That's what I'm talking with the teeter-totter. Of course, I don't want that. I want this to be a 0.9999, or as high influence as I can. So that's basically why I would change this back. So once again, I go back to the previous joint, and you can already see the change. Now, this is actually pretty good, but we could still do a little bit better. So if I rotate this over like so, that's actually looking pretty decent. This is one of the reasons why having a lot of geometry can be a huge help. But if you want this area to be a little bit more, to basically not move as much, at least over here, I could still add some influences. So for example, over here, I could add a value of 0.0 0.9. And it keeps this area a little bit nicer. Of course, you have to make sure that you go over the whole thing before calling it a day. And this area over here. Now, I put the basic values you have, but you don't necessarily need to keep it that way. So, for example, I could put this at 0.4 and paint away, although that looks like it might be causing more problems than helping. So I'm not sure if I would go with that. Oh, sorry about that. I meant this area to be 0.4, so this area over here would be about 0.6. But again, this is where you might need to shorten your brush a little bit. Again, if you hold B as in brush, you can make the brush a little bit tinier. Keep things a little bit more consistent. Yeah, there we go. This area over here, I could put that as a value of 0.3, and I'm not satisfied with that. Let's put that as 0.1. So this is keeping a little bit better consistency. And this area over here, I'm putting that at 0.0001. And I'm getting rid of the influence over here. That is if this is the way that you want to approach this. And then I basically do the same thing down here. Every time you want to have at least a little bit of give, though. You don't want to just have it start and end on a dime. That's going to definitely have more problems than help. So once that's done, I can use the smooth option, and I can smooth this out a little bit more so it has a bit of give. I wouldn't recommend changing the area where there's an influence, but yeah, this looks nice. Now, once you're done, you can try to put this back into its original position by going to Skin, go to Bind Pose, and that should usually, keyword is usually, go back to its default pose. Now, you'll want to test that out before getting to relying on it, but if it works, it does help out with the skinning process quite a bit. And I can keep rinse and repeat with all the different other parts. Now, there's two last things I want to show you, and then we'll actually get to the real thing. So the first thing I want to show is how to add an extra bone if you need to. So you'll notice that even though I selected this bone at the beginning, it's not in my listed joints over here. Now to fix this, to actually add that joint, this is what you can do. You can actually add in a joint if necessary, and again, I'll probably be doing this quite a bit the next time, is you can select the joint like so, go to Skeleton, or not Skeleton, sorry, Skin, and there's an option here called Edit Influences. And over here, you'll go to the option Add Influence. Now this will basically allow you to add a joint on a particular area. So I'm going to use the Add Influence, but hit the Settings box. Now I'll just reset this so that we're all on the same page. You want to use an option called Lock Weights. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to use the lock weight, but keep the value at 0. If you put this at any higher number, it's going to basically lock those numbers in place, and that will definitely not be good. But if you put it at 0, it can be changed later. So that's kind of the reason why we want it. Okay. So once you've selected your joint, then the mesh, you hit Apply, and then the next time I select this, we have our joint, and I can basically unlock that. So now I can use the replace once I actually select the skin again and just add some extra influence. So if I wanted to add in just a smidge over here, let's say that I'm just going to put a value of 0.1 because of reasons. Oh, there we go. Now again, this is just for testing. Now if I rotate this, you'll see that the top kind of goes with it. So if you do need to add a part, that's a really helpful thing to do. So I'll show you the process one more time. You select your mesh, or sorry, you select the bone first, or bones if it's multiple bones. Then you select the mesh. Then you go to Skin, Edit Influence, hit the settings box for Add Influence. Make sure that you lock your weights, and the default weight is 0. If you don't put it, again, if you don't put it over like that, it may not come in properly. So then you hit Apply or Add, depending on what you choose. And then just skin away, like I showed previously. Now the last thing I want to show, although hopefully it won't be something you have to worry about, but I still feel I should show everyone how to do this just to be safe. What if you have to actually make a bone not on a mesh anymore? Well, this is what you do. So let's say that we need to free up this joint. You can actually select the joint and the mesh itself. Go to Skin and Unbind Skin. Now most of the time you should just have to get to the Unbind Skin over here. That will delete your history safely in a way that works out pretty well. And yeah, so if I select this again, no longer goes with it. And again, that's something that we would want to be able to do, potentially. So again, if you need to separate elements, you go to Skin, you go to Unbind Skin, and that's pretty much the only area that you really need for this. Okay, so that I think is the long and short of the basics of skinning. So what we'll do in the next video is I want to show everyone methods on how you can apply skinning to the main mesh. And if we have time, and hopefully we should, I want to actually get into the skinning process today. So if we don't have time to get into that, at the very least, I could show you how to actually set up the bones and so on. So I think we'll wrap it up like there. What I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to just making sure the skin's not there anymore. No, it's not. I'm going to actually turn off the skin for my different parts. Just want to test to make sure that's working. Okay, so I'm going to select the mesh again. Skin, Unbind Skin. Didn't really need that, but boink. So now it's moving again. So if you want to get a little bit of practice first before taking on the real deal, give these a try and try and follow along with the video if you can. All right, so that's it for here. I'm going to keep this named as Joint Demo in case any of you do want to get some practice. And I'll see you on the next one.